My name is Brady Plunger, and I am the Assistant Curator of Education here at the University of Iowa Museum of Art. It is my pleasure to welcome you all tonight to this talk, which is the second in a series celebrating our Grant Wood Fellows. Before I begin, I would like to thank a couple of the partners of tonight's talk. I'd like to thank the Grant Wood Art Colony, the Provost's Office of Outreach and Engagement, and of course our friends at the School of Art and Art History, who not only are partners on this talks, but are great neighbors and provide us this wonderful lecture hall to use whenever we need it. I would also like to take a moment to thank all of our museum members, friends of the UIMA, and donors. We really couldn't do what we do without all of you, so you're really integral to our mission. And if you'd like to become a UIMA supporter, I would invite you to come talk to myself or any of the other UIMA staff here. We have membership brochures and museum magazines right outside the door, so you can find out how to become a member, you can find out about our building campaign, and if you have any questions about the museum at all, you can come find one of us after the talk and we'll be happy to chat with you. At this time, I would like to invite Maura Pilcher up to the podium to introduce tonight's esteemed speaker, Joe deVera.
Thank you. Thank you to the UIMA for yet another opportunity to partner on these types of talks. I think we always get a great new audience, and it's always fun to have our fellows get to have this opportunity to speak to you all. Our speaker tonight, Joe deVera, is our current Grant Wood Fellow in painting and drawing, although by his own admission, he is sometimes forced to work through other media to express himself. Given his past enlistment in the United States Marine Corps from 2001 to 2008, serving 2 combat deployments, and in addition to having been born in the Philippines during a time of political turmoil and violence, Joe deVera's works are often attempts to make sense of the absurd theaters of human tragedy, exploring the possible relationships between historiography and art objects, while simultaneously investigating the cultural networks of mass conflict. His exhibition record includes solo and 2-person shows in Philadelphia, Connecticut, and Southern California. He has also been awarded the Joshua Tree Highlands Art Residency, the Terra American Art Foundation Summer Fellowship, and the Cloud Projects Prize. deVera received his MFA in Painting and Printmaking from the Yale School of Art and his BFA in Painting from California State University, Fullerton, where he also served as an adjunct lecturer for several years. And now he will discuss how we got here. Please welcome Joe deVera.
So I'm Joe. Just as an addendum, really quick, the original title for this show actually was How I Got Here, but I thought that would be a little too pretentious because I didn't want it to be all about me, so I changed it to we. But in reality, I was using it as a royal we because it was still about me, which in retrospect is even more pretentious. So don't worry, this whole talk probably doesn't even have anything to do with this title at all. So as Maura said, a lot of my work is sort of deals with my autobiographical experiences and sort of not actively at first when I first started painting and being in the visual arts, but it's sort of kind of seeped in just because it's the life I lived, and it's definitely something that's unavoidable and I had to deal with. And so I first and foremost, when people say like, oh, what kind of art do you do? Well, I always say I'm a painter, and I usually stop at that. Even when I don't do any paintings at all, I always say I'm a painter because for some reason that's kind of the primary language I think of, even when these things end up not as paintings. But yes, I am a painter, and so I'll go through these series of slides pretty quick just to kind of introduce what I'm trying to get at. I think it's important to note that a lot of the paintings I deem important, I think are actually failures in what I'm trying to do. So, but I still keep them in here because I think their point of failure is probably just as important as their successes in me identifying them. So a lot of times I source government photographs, satellite imagery, and sort of combined them in conglomerate with personal photographs when I was at war, just to kind of really put them through this filter, my own personal filter of events, kind of trying to reclaim some sort of control from all these massive scales of information. So that's what I've been trying to kind of focus on in my paintings, and trying to really explore what paintings can do, which for my part sometimes became very limited. Like I said, it's productive because it's enabled me to a sense of reclaim, but it's also sort of became problematic because I questioned my own authority to speak of these conditions that are, again, in a mass scale. So I'll go through a couple of them. And a lot of it also kind of stems from my interest in history and also somewhat literature. I mean, the difficulties are sort of obvious when you're talking about sort of history, especially when you're part of it. I think it was Marita Sturken who penned, framing these kinds of history has a problematic relationship to the lived body of the individual who participated in it. In fact, it operates more efficiently when survivors are no longer alive. So that's sort of kind of a historiography sense of what I'm trying to deal with. And so I got stuck in this old Abex conundrum of like what to paint in a post-nuclear age, right? Like Richard Feynman, the physicist, kind of framed it weirdly when he was kind of instrumental in making the nuclear bomb. He realized that he helped make this weapon to virtually level all of humanity, and he went outside and he saw buildings in construction and he kind of felt anxious, right? Like, what was the point of it all? And I kind of hit that wall with paintings, and I didn't know if I was a good enough painter to tackle these issues, or if there was any paintings good enough to tackle these issues, right? Barnett Newman was once quoted saying, like, how do we paint figure without butchering them? Kind of as a comment on World War II. So I kind of ran into that. So I started just taking objects, or taking not only just military images, but images from anywhere else, and started just painting them at just as a frantic conglomerate of just weird arrangements. These two paintings actually are part of a 14-panel series, but the series itself was a failure. There were these 14 panels. They were supposed to line up with the Stations of the Cross, actually, but I didn't tell anyone that. But they were supposed to line up in the same pattern this 1945 Philadelphia Inquirer had, in which had 14 pages that talked about and framed World War II, and I thought that was absurd. You had 14 pages to talk about World War II, so I kind of put them in this kind of 14 panels, and it was super didactic. It fell flat. It really didn't feel like what I wanted it to feel, but I felt like individually they were successes as just normal paintings without the series. So there was a lot of hardship on what I could do and what I wasn't a good enough painter. So I kind of looked at other attempts of painting or sort of just art or even visual imagery that could maybe have the same sort of impact that I wanted to get, or something of that nature. This is not mine, actually. This is. Does anyone know where this is? This is the sort of the graffiti in Tahrir Square in 2011 during the Arab Spring. Graham Harman, he's a philosopher, said that these are kind of some of the most powerful visual imagery he's ever seen. I don't know. I think I can disagree with that, but still, it's the sort of the visual imagery and how artists kind of art as a revolt kind of thing, kind of that focus during this event was really, really important to me, and it opened up some possibilities of what kind of visual imagery can affect the social culture. Of course, this is, anyone know where this is? Rothko Chapel, right? And Rothko gets thrown around and he's kind of ad nauseum. But I feel like, when hung right, there's just this powerful, uncanny, live burial, funerary element that's just just a tenor that I've always wanted to get. So I struggled with these things, and I realized, yes, it can be done. Some artists have done it. I'm speaking at it with a different tenor, so how could I fight my way out of it? During this time too, I noticed I drew or painted whales for really no reason at all. Just as a compulsion, it started coming up. And I've never seen a whale or never went whale watching at all. I did read Moby Dick probably at a younger age than I should, because I realized that I didn't really get the impact of it until later on in my life, but it kind of resonated with me. And after some studying abroad, I actually made this installation while I was at Yale. And it was kind of a watershed moment for me, in which it kind of hit a certain condition that I didn't have to reify. It was just there. And I wanted to really flush out that moment. And that these things were doing, this installation was doing a lot of things that the paintings weren't. And so I kind of turned away from painting, but not really, and tried to really hit that condition, whatever that was. And the harder it was for me to specify, I think the better. Here's a close-up view of that. And then this image, I don't think I've ever shown. I don't know if I'm pretty sure I didn't show it last time in my first talk. This is it. I apologize for the documentation of this, but I still think of this work as one of my most important. It was never shown in a gallery, and it only existed in my studio. And this is only one part of it. I actually made what it was is I actually made various bomb detonators and connected them to these light bulbs. And this one, you can see this part right here, there's a phone number that you can call that actually, you call it, this light lights up for 2 seconds and comes off. And that sat in my studio because I really didn't know at the time how to present it. What made it more complicated was when I was making this, actually, the Boston bombings happened, which was weird because it totally changed the work. I made the work, I finished it, an event occurred that changed the work. So then there was this transformation, sort of weird, alchemy almost, because the physical properties of work didn't change, the narrative changed, and it changed the work. So that dialogue was interesting to me. There was a dialogue of object and event. And it was also cool because, well, not cool, but also problematic and sort of disturbing. I didn't know if I could just put this out there and show it, because it would be somewhat offensive. But at a certain point, it's supposed to be, right? The Boston bombings were offensive. It was disturbing. There's a part of this that is not easy. There's a part of this that we have to kind of look at. But I never really got the chance or format, and I would like to revisit it in some space someday. There's other elements there. I made a tripwire. I made pressure plates that would light these light bulbs up. In this particular case, the cell phone detonator thing is hidden in here, and I wouldn't really tell the audience what it was. But again, one of the cool aspects was even soon after I would sit in my studio, the light would still come on. Someone was still calling the number, even months after they visited this particular piece. So I thought it was an intriguing kind of study, sort of participatory. And I also began starting to look at other objects that kind of facilitate this idea of war remembrance, and particularly memorials. and what they did to our, and how they're somewhat very complicated in our sort of narrative. And this especially, and does anyone know what this one is, obviously? Yeah, the Vietnam Memorial. Which is, you know, the how it came up is actually kind of funny. Maya Lin designed the thing while she was an undergrad in Yale School of Architecture. And she proposed the project. She turned it in to her professor, and she actually got a B for this thing. So, but then she turned it into the design competition, and she actually won. Now, memorials are, you know, somewhat complicated because one, they do illustrate, or they illuminate the sense of loss, the sense of like of need to be remembered, as opposed to monuments, which, you know, are not, they're to commemorate, right? But they also have this almost, war memorials particularly, not all memorials are like this, right? So there's memorials like when there's something tragic happens with a recent school shooting or something, and then people will put flowers along the streets. That itself is a type of social memorial. But sort of war memorials are somewhat more rigid, and I think, and they sort of romanticize and aestheticize the event in a more concrete way, which sort of leads to a kind of historical revisionism. So there's this really weird push-pull of remembering sort of the faults and the loss, but also this forceful romanticism that actually becomes pro-war almost, especially when you talk about like other, like I didn't leave it in here, but there's the Iwo Jima Memorial. So there's a sense of healing, but also there's a sense of this repetition and this rigid sort of war narrative. Has anyone been here? The Arizona Memorial? So I think the World War II was a more cut and dry sort of war. It didn't have the sort of complicated narrative that Vietnam War did. But I put that on here because I think one particular, the most important part of this, I think the visceral part of this memorial, can anyone guess? Has anyone been here? One aspect, yes.
Looking down.
Yes, what do you see?
Buried ships, scuttled ships.
Yes, and what? And you see oil slicks.
Well, that too.
Yeah, yes.
Fish, lots of different.
Right. The ships are still the ships are still there, and you can see them. They're just right under the surface. Like you can see the masts and the antennae still there, and the oil from the ships are still seeping out, which speaks much more than the memorial itself. This sort of like always bleeding wound coming out of the water is like it's almost, you know, you can't, I can't remake that, and so I run into this wall of like, what am I going to do? This almost becomes secondary, sort of just pantomime, and then this becomes the real event. So I wanted to get something a little bit more less institutional and something that had that sort of vulnerability. So I kind of made the series, like I just loosely titled Beasts of Burden, and really made these armatures that are both kind of points of sort of marshaled instruments of war, but at the same time victims. So formations that looked sort of like guns were also limbs, repurposed objects, repurposed into a sort of a military frame. This was just a sail. I kind of turned it into a weird battle flag of some sort. And then paintings of anonymous spaces, like anonymous mausoleums, and then scale shifts. This was actually I don't think I ever told anyone at the time, but this is actually just a painting of a cigarette, but like in the corner of my studio. And it became sort of this stand-in for weirdly the massive amount of loss. So I started playing with that shift in scale and really the vulnerability and sort of the problematic referencing that I was trying to do. I would make prints of big events really small, lay them out on the ground, arrange them, and stratify them, again, as a sense of control and reclaim. But I felt like, I don't know, putting them in a gallery didn't make sense almost. Like they had to be out somewhat in the real world, whatever that means. So in 2015, I got a chance to go to the Joshua Tree residency, in which I got to put some of these sculptures out, not in a gallery. And in this case, it's in the middle of nowhere. I mean, literally in the middle of nowhere. This is where it is. And yes, when I say that in the middle of nowhere, it wasn't really in the middle of nowhere. It's actually, it's in the middle of the desert, but in this abandoned cabin. But also, it's actually a well-trafficked area with a lot of ATV traffic and a lot of people just coming into the desert and doing what, I don't know, desert people do. So I put it in there. I didn't put any signs in it. I just wanted it to be there, just to encounter it. I didn't want it to be an art object. I didn't care what it was, just sort of there for the experience. And it was kind of bizarre because people didn't know what they were and what to take with it. And pretty soon, after a few days, people would disassemble them, really find out that they were made of parachutes, which was worth money, find out that some parts of it were useful, and they would try to take it down and take them apart, which was traumatic to me, actually. It was like, and I wanted it to be like that. I wanted it to put it out there. If it was destroyed by wind, that it was destroyed. If it was taken apart, but it was very traumatic. And like in a matter of like a few days, they were getting dismantled. So eventually, sadly, I had to put signs up saying like, oh yeah, this is just a temporary art exhibit, just so that it would last as much as I wanted it to. And also, what was funny is that I came back. This was up for about 2 months, and I live about 2 hours away from the actual place I put it. But every week, I would come back and quote unquote tend to these things and repair them. And it almost became this sort of ritualized performance that I had to do. And that sort of vulnerability really struck me, and I wanted that sort of aspect that permeated to like all my other works. But how I could do that and really put that in painting or anything else, I don't know. So we'll move on. But these were a series of paintings that was kind of done with them, again, dealing with the same subject. So that's it. Again, this is a small painting, 14 by 9 inches. It was just a moth glued to a piece of a panel. And then again, a lot of itemized stratification, a lot of labeling and kind of military nomenclature. And then that's a whale vertebrae on that I charted. That was superimposed to sort of I think a chart that curved how much a curveball curves or something, because I was obsessed with baseball at the time, still am. And then again, playing with the material, playing with domestic material, and then militarizing them, doing kind of a reverse sort of thing. This was actually in France. I did a residency for the terror organization, which was really kind of cool. I actually took old French furniture that you can buy pretty cheap, relatively, and to their horror, I actually hacked them up and turned them into sculptures and art pieces, and kind of furnished a room with what remains. So that sort of weird dialogue of militarizing something that's domestic kind of blurred the lines of like, taking it out of, taking the thin red line of the battlefield and really putting it in sort of this weird global consciousness. So we'll move on. So which leads me currently to what I'm trying to deal with right now. And these next two are actually old works, but also new works. I don't think this was in the last presentation as well. This is a screen print I did, and it didn't always look like this. This was in 2014 when its first iteration. I put it on Duralar, knowing that the ink would eventually fall off, and I kept it over the years and had it just systematically deteriorate, and collected what was left of the pigment and just kept it with me. Because again, I really wanted to facilitate this weird vulnerability. And it also kind of reiterated what I didn't talk about before, is this screen that I was trying to put on everything. So this is another one that didn't deteriorate as much. Now it took 4 years to get to this moment, but it actually, if the process itself, you can actually just shake it up and try to do this in 5 minutes. But I wanted the weathering to actually take place, to actually just it as a piece, as a live piece, to weather onto itself. So how this is actually shown, there's the piece is hung on the wall, but there's actually a little platform which collects the pieces that eventually fall off. Again, it's sort of like, it really does speak to this weird vulnerability that I'm trying to get at, but at the same time, again, with this institutional information that I'm trying to critique. So that is actually the last slide. So I want to open up, my last presentation, I wanted to open it up more time to questions. So I wanted this to be a little bit more short. So hopefully I'll have more conversation with you guys and sort of your responses to my work. So I'll open up with that. That's it. All right, any questions? Yes?
So, the changing nature of that image and its slow decay and your interest in that probably had something to do with the changing memory or memorialization of war experiences and whether or not they are valorized or...
Right. There was there's this weird thing about fixed information that I had a problem with, right? And we all know, like, history changes, but even facts change. It's really weird. Like, people in the medical field realize, like, we think as facts as something solid, but like, people in the medical field, things that are factual now, 10 years down the road, are not, because the procedures change and the information changes. So I have that like that weird sort of uneasiness about representing the event, or can you represent the event, because of this changing of cultural mindset. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It has that sort of kind of weird dissonance. Anyone else? Yes?
Can you talk about, oh, sorry, was there someone?
No.
I was interested, like, the sort of history of, like, the whale.
Right.
Pieces, and because you mentioned it was a kind of obsession, like you were just making these images.
Mhm.
I wondered if anything, like over the years, and even recently, like has come in a way to consciousness about what that represented.
Yes, that also, well, that it was a weird, compulsion had a lot to do with it, and that was brought on. I talked about in the last talk, and I don't want to reiterate it, but the way that was conceived was I got a grant, a pretty sizable grant, to go and do a travel proposal, and I went to the Pacific Rim, I went to Pearl Harbor, I went to the Marshall Islands, and I went to Hiroshima, and then I came back, and I was absolutely just sort of depressed, and I couldn't make any work at all when I was supposed to make work. But then there was this weird sort of compulsion, and this part I'm going to steal from Gregory Crudson's presentation when he talks about this this compulsion like what's in the Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Has anyone seen that movie? Yeah? And when the father is making stuff out of mashed potatoes, making stuff out of dirt, that's how it came up. I made. Oh, okay. I thought that was something else. I thought it was like a leak or something. So that sort of making. Wow, that's intense. I didn't know it could do that. Fantastic. Wow. I thought that was a sort of awesome ringtone. That's okay. So yeah, it came up with just this compulsion and not really, these whale things that I've painted and never really, I painted them and it's like everything failed. Like, no, this is not it. So I painted them. No, this is not it. And so I was like, oh, why don't I just make a fucking whale? So I did that, and it's like, okay, maybe this is it. But, it wasn't really about the whale. It was a sort of a screen. Like, again, I'm referencing sort of, I think, Maria Sturgeon and also Freud at what a screen was. It was just this sort of aspect of trauma where you put something in the place of something. And in a military term, a screen is also like military bodies kind of screening for other bodies. So the whale became that screen, also a shroud. And it also kind of tied into literature, but not Moby Dick, actually, but the Sebald's Rings of Saturn for some odd reason. Because in the end of that book, he actually talks about this funerary act of which people in Dutch culture would put dark silk over mirrors so that the dead would rise and not be distracted by the landscape. And that actually affected me. And so I made this whale as a screen and a shroud, and also as at one point a symbol of imperial manifestation, but also a victim. So it all came out of that.
They felt like, they alluded to they almost looked like bombs at some point.
Right.
Like bombers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it was
Headstones,
right,
it seemed like.
right. And it was also a weird parallel to Catch-22. There's a part where Snowden, one of the characters, actually was wrapped in parachutes. And parachutes itself as a sort of wrap in like a hasty combat wrap was also just an allusion to that as well. So it became a lot of things. And it's still changing. Like for me, I'm still even when it's deinstalled and gone, I still mine what it meant and how I can actually, and I think that's fruitful because I think what the visual arts has going for it is we can talk in these margins, right? When we talk about history, when you read about history, there's a certain point of rigor, or not rigor, but there's this sort of concreteness that doesn't allow for some of the information that's can't be said to really be facilitated in our consciousness. And even I think it's even more prevalent in visual arts than these memorials or monuments that we can erect. So and I'm just trying to mine what that can be because because it's ever changing. I don't know if I can really actually get there. But again, like I said, these point of failures are actually just as informative for me as the successes. So, anyone else? Yes.
That's not really a question, just maybe a comment or what your thoughts are like. My parents, they're 86 years old and they were teenagers during World War II in Britain, and my mom has memories of her dad being absent during that time. And now they're in their old age, older people, they do reminisce about the war. And I can tell there's a sense of loss about the people
Mhm.
during World War II with actions that
Right.
the curtains and all of that at night. But I know there's war going on, but I feel very,
Disassociated from that.
I don't feel that loss and impacted the way, they're
Mhm.
thinking back over their lives. It comes up, especially like with movies about Churchill.
Right.
I just wondered if you had any thoughts about the disconnect. It seems like that with
I think, well, I mean, the disconnect and it's totally different, right? The conventional war and wars how we thought of back then, it's totally changed. Wars were fought population versus population. Civilians became targets as much as military personnel were targets, right? Certainly in World War II, it was, people were targeting cities. And I think even then, I think America has always sort of, but you were talking about your parents who were in England, you said? I think what's complicated too, in our nation, we don't have the same trauma of war because there was not ever a war since the Civil War that was fought on our soil. So the way we remember the trauma of World War II and things like that, or even the Vietnam War, I think there's that because our population has somewhat been secluded from that. And that itself is weird. Like when I started making domestic items and turning them into like these objects, what I could say would be militarized. I am trying to think of of blurring this thin red line of where the battlefield is, and actually maybe saying that there's a bigger agent that's making this happen, which there is, right? I mean. There's a shared responsibility of a breakdown of information, and these things occur, and it's massive, and it's like, and how can you? And for me, I was there ground level when we invaded Iraq in 2003, but then I questioned like, is my view, which is totally different from the people who was seeing it at home, was my view more accurate? Because I saw just a little part. Right? And you guys got to see like a more macro part filtered by news media and everything else. And those things like transition and change. So what is accurate and how can we make things accurate when that happens? So yes, no, it's always changing. And I think the perceptions there's no one perception, which is the difficulty of it. And which makes, I think, visual arts maybe a good way to really see it in this light. To kind of not frame it, I don't think you can ever frame it, but see it in a light that's maybe different and no less effective than, say, a history book or a documentary film. Anything else? Yeah.
So when you were talking about how you kind of enjoyed tending to those horses in the desert, do you see like performance kind of entering in your work in any type of way, or did you document like those moments?
I didn't. Those were, I don't know if I would say enjoy. I just thought it was a need. I've thought about performance, but I've never really specifically actively sought it out. But that itself was like it's not performance. It was just it was just performed. It was sort of ritualized. So in short answer, no, I've never actively thought of that as performance. But I think of that as performance, but I've never actively made it a performance. I still hold that possibility in how I could do it. Maybe in a more durational thing when I actually go ritually wake up in the morning, tend these things for a given amount of time, and then go back. I think that's been something I could think about. But I think the way it was, how it was vulnerable and how it just came out to be like that was a lot, I think it would have been better than if I had to plan it out. Anything else? Yes, or we'll go back.
To hear from you why you feel Vietnam Memorial was unsuccessful.
I didn't say it was unsuccessful. I think it's.
Tell me what your reservations are. I had some reservations about
I think war memorials itself are like, there's a certain amount of rigidity and I think there's a lot of things that discuss like the problems with, particularly even the Vietnam Memorial. There's Marita Sturken kind of illuminates the fact that it came out with mixed reviews, right? It was this weird sort of unfeeling cut on the ground. Maya Lin herself distanced herself from the experience. She didn't want to interview veterans. She didn't want to know a lot about the war. So she wanted this just weird nihilistic like wall on the ground, which is, that could be said. I don't think that's neither here nor there. I just think that war memorials, as they serve for us as a part of remembrance, part of healing, but also part of like giving us a sort of sense of loss. I think there's also this shift of, they also sort of weirdly romanticize things. Take the in Arlington, there's the
I agree about some of the early ones. I don't think that one is romantic at all.
Oh no, it is not actually. That's the least.
I find it quite differently from you.
Right.
And my perspective on the Vietnam War was that I grew up at a time where it was too recent to be taught as history.
Right.
But it wasn't current class.
Right.
And I just never learned it until I voluntarily learned it much later in my life. And I lived in Washington, D.C. at the time that it was installed, and for a significant period of time afterwards, it was very profound for me in not knowing, the complications of history, and there was controversy, obviously, but basically being completely ignorant. What I found profoundly moving about it, as I found in Normandy and places in Europe, is the slow death that you experience, that you have of being buried
Right.
in this wall of people's names. And I found it very profound and moving in that way. And it wasn't because of the people that were there having their own personal experience with it, but you were forced to confront the volume of the loss and sinking down in the landscape, how you're a part of that loss because of your own sort of symbolic burial.
I think you're on point, and I think I'm most interested with that monument because of what you said. And also, the Vietnam War was a very contentious sort of war, and it wasn't like World War II. There was and veterans came home and they were spit on. It was a very complicated thing that we're still trying to parse out in our identity. And the way Maya Lin dealt with it as just this, it's weird because she separated herself from it and then talked about like the condition without talking about, well, the names are there and that's important as well. But there's a reference that she takes out, right? There's no flag-bearing troops that are like, this is Iwo Jima. And I totally agree with you in that aspect. That it can be seen as not romantic, and it's not the same as not like with the Arizona Memorial. I think, like I said, like the most jarring thing about that is the oil it's still bleeding, and then the cut on the ground on the Vietnam Memorial. I mean, that's something I do look at, like how, as just a visual person, like how can you do that? How can you reach that, like this thing to get that condition, without using kind of minimal references, just a gesture. So no, I totally agree. But then again, there's a part of like it seems like it is a wound that it is a cut wound that doesn't heal.
So,
Yes.
metaphorically, it's a wound on our national landscape.
Right.
In one of the most national places.
Mm-hmm. It's an open gaping
It's an open gaping
wound. Right. It's a V.
It's hugely successful.
Oh no, I think it is, and I think the things that I talk about of it being problematic, it's not itself being problematic. It's the idea of us looking at things that are very problematic into itself. Which is it's successful. Like that's why I think of like some of my paintings that are failures, like I need to think of why their failures is successful, because I mean, like it is hard to paint like figures and talk about this and paint figures without butchering the figures, because you're standing, you're referencing an event that's like that can't be reified.
That's your vision, that's your view, and that's a valuable thing to share.
Yes,
So who's to say it's fair?
I know, but that's why I go. That's why I go back. It's like, wait, that's my authority, but is it my authority, right? But it should be my authority. But I think that doubt, it's yeah. Let's talk about it. But I think part of the doubt is talking about, like, part of the introspectiveness, I think, is part of the journey. I don't think it's, like I figured it out, but part of the screen, the screen is the thing. So the whale is the thing. But that is an interesting aspect. You had a...
Yes, speaking of whales.
Yes.
Have you seen the whale skeleton in Mammal Hall?
No, I have not. I need to go see that. Which is weird too, because like Maya Lin was like distanced herself from what, like I was not interested in going whale watching. I was not, I didn't know anything about like this, I read Moby Dick. I know something about whales because I read it as a kid, but I didn't want to see one in real life. There was shores in Rhode Island that whales would beach, and I wouldn't, I didn't care. I needed to make one. Using my own like perspective, and I think that was important. And maybe in the same way, how that memorial was successful. So, I do need to go see it. And there's been a lot of, I think, whales in art and kind of referencing that. So, out of the whales, yeah. There's a cool one with I think Gabriel Orozco made a whale as well. I don't know if he drew patterns on the skeleton or made casts of the skeleton. I mean, whales are just sort of a great signifier for a lot of the complexities that I'm dealing with, and I don't know why I unconsciously was drawn to that, but yeah, no, I'll go. I will need to go see that. Anything else? We have a few more minutes, so I actually timed it really well. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Your work. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, because I think the materials, it's not so much the materials, the identity of materials, which I kind of like put a signifier on, in which what's military material and what's like civilian material is like really important to me. Like the value system in a military world was so weird to me when I was in the military, like the serialization and the value that they put on, and how you could actually put a cost in someone's life, like how much someone cost in training, in replacement. I was in tanks. I was a tank crewman, and there's 4 people in a tank: a loader, a gunner, a driver, and a tank commander. In other nations, there's only 3. They replaced the loader with an auto loader, but in the Marine Corps, they didn't want to put a mechanical loader because it was easier to replace the man than it was to repair the mechanism. So there's this weird shift in value systems that actually equate human life in a very disturbing way. And I kind of, so civilian material and then military material, I mean, they could, one could be a piece of wood and the other could be a piece of wood, but the meanings change whether or not you marshal them into this other need and this other spectrum of logic that deals with killing people or saving people, actually. So that is a very interesting thing that I think about, but maybe not material onto itself. But I hope that answered your question. Yes?
Is there a relationship between compulsion and memorialization for you?
Yes. I think, generally, I think there is for all of us. Right? When Princess Di died, they flooded the streets with flowers. And that was itself a memorial. I think the compulsion comes out in a lot of things, in trauma, And I think there is definitely a relationship to that. So yes, short answer. And I think it means differently to other people, and it manifests itself differently to other people. Yeah. Anything else? Yes.
Did you do any artwork when you were at Soldier?
I did sketches. I did little, but I really wasn't so versed on what it meant to be like an artist at a time. Really just a weird FYI. I went into the Marine Corps, and the Marine Corps is really bizarre in which they still have this particular. I know it's boring. They still have this particular job in which they actually send field artists, and they're part of combat photography, with sketchbooks and pastels and watercolors and oil paints. They still send them out there and do sort of battlefield paintings. And it's actually a very small group, very skilled group, and that's what I wanted to do. So I practiced with that. I got a sketchbook and I sketched things, and I tried to like try to get the landscape and try to. So it was just me kind of using my visual, just drawing from observation, but nothing really sort of It was just me reacting to the conditions around me, and I wanted to do that. But after a couple of tours, I didn't want to play in the sand anymore, so I didn't want to do that. So that's to the extent. Anyone else? Okay, that's actually time. Thank you.